Victoria smirked as I handed Hannah the wrapped box. "Let me guess," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Another homemade treasure from Grandpa Frank." The room chuckled. A few guests exchanged knowing looks. I smiled back, my weathered hands steady as I placed the gift on the table. She had no idea what was coming. The box looked simple enough. Brown paper, tied with a red ribbon I'd saved from last Christmas. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Exactly what Victoria expected from the old man who lived on his pension and grew tomatoes in his backyard. "Oh, Frank," she continued, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You really shouldn't have spent so much." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Hannah, her daughter, looked embarrassed, caught between loving her grandfather and not wanting to seem different from her friends. I patted Hannah's shoulder gently. "Sometimes the most important gifts don't cost money, sweetheart." My voice was calm, but inside, my heart hammered. Today would change everything. Today, the truth about my son Michael's death would finally come to light. Victoria rolled her eyes and walked away, probably to check on the caterers. She had no idea she'd just sealed her own fate. Just before you continue to watch, Joe would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage him to keep his streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. Alright, back to the story. Victoria had thrown the most lavish birthday party Hannah had ever seen. The backyard looked like something from a magazine. Gold balloons everywhere, a chocolate fountain that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and a DJ spinning music loud enough to wake the dead. Professional caterers wandered around with silver trays. The cake alone probably cost $500. Everything sparkled. Everything screamed money. Victoria loved showing off, especially when she thought she was making me look poor. I arrived right on time, carrying my small hand-wrapped gift. The moment Victoria saw me walking up the driveway, her eyes went straight to the package. Her smile turned into that familiar sneer I'd learned to recognize over the past 2 years. "Frank's here," she announced to her sister, loud enough for half the party to hear. "And look, he brought another one of his special gifts." She said special, like it meant garbage. Her friends whispered behind their champagne glasses. I caught words like sweet, and trying his best, and so sad. They thought they were being kind, but their pity stung worse than Victoria's cruelty. Hannah ran over and hugged me tight. At least someone was happy to see me. My box was placed in the corner of the gift table, far from the designer bags and fancy wrapped presents. Shiny silver bags with perfect bows stood tall and proud, while my humble package sat alone like an unwanted child. A few guests snickered when they saw it. One woman pointed it out to her husband, and they both shook their heads with sad smiles. Victoria made sure everyone noticed. She guided people past the gift table, always making sure to pause at my contribution. "Isn't that sweet?" she'd say. "Frank made something special for Hannah. He's so creative with his little projects." The words sounded nice, but her tone made them feel like insults. I watched from across the yard, nursing a glass of lemonade. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The hardest part was over. The gift was here. Now I just had to wait for the right moment. Hannah kept looking at the gift table, then at me. She was curious about what Grandpa Frank had brought this time. Last year, it was a wooden jewelry box I'd made in my garage. The year before, a photo album of her baby pictures with her dad. This year's gift would be different. This year would change her life forever. After cake, Victoria clapped her hands together. "All right, everyone, time for presents." The crowd gathered around as Hannah settled into a chair surrounded by colorful packages. Victoria picked up my box first. "Let's get Grandpa's gift out of the way," she announced with a laugh. "Save the best for last, right?" The guests chuckled. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. My hands tightened around my lemonade glass. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for 2 months, ever since I found Michael's diary, who is my son, in the attic. Ever since I learned the truth about what really happened to my son. Hannah reached for the box with a genuine smile. She never let Victoria's comments affect how she treated me. That's what made this so hard. She loved her mother, despite everything. Breaking her heart was the last thing I wanted to do. But she deserved to know the truth about her father. Victoria stood behind Hannah's chair, arms crossed, waiting to make another joke about whatever cheap thing the old man had brought this time. Her friends held their phones, ready to record the sweet moment of grandmother and grandfather. They had no idea they were about to witness something much different. Hannah opened the box carefully, the way she always did with presents. Inside sat a leather-bound scrapbook, some sealed letters, and a small USB drive. Her smile faltered slightly. This wasn't what she'd expected either. She lifted the scrapbook and opened to the first page. Her face changed. Then she flipped another page, and another. Suddenly, tears started streaming down her cheeks. Not happy tears. Scared tears. The room went completely silent. The DJ stopped the music. Even the caterers paused their cleanup to watch. Hannah. Victoria's voice cracked with confusion. What's wrong, honey? Hannah couldn't speak. She just stared at the page, her whole body trembling. I stood up slowly, my old joints protesting, and walked over to her. It's okay, sweetheart, I said softly. You need to know the truth. Victoria leaned over Hannah's shoulder to see what had upset her daughter so much. When she saw the page, all the color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The first page was a letter, written in Michael's handwriting. The letter he'd hidden in his desk drawer, the one I'd found 2 months ago when I was cleaning out his things. Hannah's voice shook as she read aloud. My dearest Hannah, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. But there's something you need to know about what really happened to me. The party guests moved closer, straining to hear. Victoria stood frozen behind Hannah's chair, her face growing paler with each word. I thought I was getting sick naturally. Hannah continued reading. The doctor said it was just a virus that wouldn't go away. But then I started noticing things. Strange things about your mother's behavior. Hannah, stop, Victoria whispered. You don't need to read that now. Not in front of everyone. But Hannah kept reading. She started acting different after I signed the life insurance papers. She smiled less. She watched me more. And one night, I caught her putting something in my drink. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. Victoria's sister stepped forward, confusion written all over her face. I pretended to drink it, but spilled it when she wasn't looking. Hannah's voice grew stronger. The next day, I felt fine. That's when I knew someone was trying to hurt me. Someone I trusted with my life. Victoria lunged forward, trying to grab the scrapbook. That's enough. This is all lies. Your father was sick, Hannah. He was confused and paranoid. Enough, Victoria shouted, reaching for the scrapbook. But I stepped between her and Hannah, holding up a second identical book. This stays with her, I said firmly. My voice carried across the silent yard. Hannah deserves to know what happened to her father. The guests stared in shock. Victoria's perfectly planned party had turned into something from a nightmare. Her friends whispered among themselves, phones out, recording everything. You're a sick old man, Victoria hissed at me. Making up stories, traumatizing my daughter. Michael was ill. He died from complications. The doctors said so. The doctors said what you told them to say, I replied calmly. But Michael wrote down everything. Every suspicion. Every strange incident. Every time you tried to poison him. Hannah clutched the scrapbook to her chest, tears still flowing. Grandpa Frank, is this real? Did Mom really hurt Daddy? Victoria's face twisted with rage and panic. Don't listen to him, honey. Your grandfather has lost his mind. He's been alone too long, making up crazy conspiracy theories. But I could see doubt creeping into Hannah's eyes. She was 14 now, old enough to start putting pieces together. Old enough to remember things that didn't quite make sense at the time. I opened my copy of the scrapbook to the same page. Read the next part, Hannah. Read what your father wrote about his final days. Inside the box were dozens of photos, letters, and copies of Michael's diary entries. I'd spent weeks organizing everything, making sure the timeline was clear and the evidence was undeniable. This isn't just about the letters, I explained to Hannah and the stunned crowd. There are photos, receipts, and documentation of everything your mother did. Hannah flipped through the pages with shaking hands. Each page revealed another piece of the puzzle. Photos of Victoria at the pharmacy. Copies of prescriptions that weren't meant for sick patients. Bank records showing large purchases right after Michael got sicker. Look at this one. I pointed to a page dated 3 weeks before Michael died. Your father wrote this after he noticed your mother tampering with his 4-bag. Victoria stepped backward, bumping into her sister. This is insane. Frank, you're having some kind of breakdown. None of this is real. But the evidence was right there in black and white. Michael's careful handwriting documenting every suspicion, every strange incident, every time he felt worse after Victoria brought him food or medicine. One entry was labeled, "Why I'm scared to sleep." Another, "She thinks I don't notice, but I do." And the final entry, dated just days before he died, I'm too weak to fight anymore. If something happens to me, I hope Dad finds this and protects Hannah. The silence in the backyard was deafening. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Your father had taken out a large life insurance policy just 6 months before he got sick, I explained to Hannah. $500,000. Enough to change someone's life completely. I flipped to another section of the scrapbook. Michael wrote about how your mother's behavior changed immediately after he signed those papers. She stopped being affectionate. She started asking strange questions about his health, his family history, his daily routines. Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. The insurance money? Your mother collected every penny 3 weeks after the funeral, I said. She bought this house, renovated the kitchen, and started throwing expensive parties, all while telling everyone she was struggling financially. Victoria's hands were shaking now. I was grieving. I needed to keep busy, to make a good life for Hannah. There's nothing wrong with using insurance money to provide for your child. There's everything wrong with murdering someone to get it, I replied. The word murder hit the crowd like a physical blow. Several people gasped. Victoria's sister covered her mouth with her hands. Hannah dropped the scrapbook and stared at her mother with wide, horrified eyes. You killed him, Hannah whispered. You killed my daddy for money. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. I didn't kill anyone. He was sick. He died from complications. You can't prove anything different. But I could, and I was about to. Your father wrote about the night you poured something into his drink. I continued, reading from the scrapbook. He pretended to knock it over by accident. The next morning, he felt fine. That's when he started keeping this diary. Hannah flipped to the entry I was referencing. Michael's handwriting was shakier than usual, but his words were clear. Victoria put something in my water tonight. Something that made it taste bitter. I spilled it and pretended it was an accident. She looked angry, but tried to hide it. I'm scared to sleep now. The crowd pressed closer, everyone straining to hear. Victoria's expensive party had become a public trial, and she was losing badly. When he got really sick, you insisted he stay home instead of going to the hospital. I continued. You said it would be more peaceful, more private, more convenient for what you were planning. I wanted him comfortable, Victoria shouted. I wanted him to die with dignity, surrounded by love. You wanted him to die where no one would notice what you were doing to his fore, I shot back. Where no one would question why his condition kept getting worse instead of better. Hannah was reading more entries now, each one more damning than the last. Her father had documented everything, right up until he became too weak to write. His final entry was heartbreaking. I know she's waiting for me to die. I just hope Dad finds this someday and protects Hannah from the truth. Michael's final diary entries were the hardest to read. His handwriting became weaker and more desperate as the days passed. But his message was clear. He knew what was happening to him. She keeps adjusting my fore when she thinks I'm sleeping, Hannah read aloud, her voice breaking. But I notice everything. The way she checks my pulse afterward. The way she smiles when I get weaker. I'm too sick to fight back now. Victoria tried one more time to grab the scrapbook. Stop reading that garbage. Your father was delirious from fever. Sick people imagine things that aren't real. Then explain this, I said, flipping to a photo section. These are pictures I took of your father's for setup after he died. Before the hospice workers cleaned everything up. The photos showed clear evidence of tampering. Extra tubing that didn't belong. Injection ports that had been accessed. Small puncture marks in the fore bag that suggested additional substances had been added. I didn't know what I was looking at then, I admitted. But after I found the diary, I showed these photos to a nurse friend of mine. She confirmed that someone had been adding things to his medication. Hannah stared at the photos, then at her mother. You did this. You really did this to Daddy. The crowd was completely silent now, watching a family implode in real time. Victoria's friends had backed away, no longer wanting to be associated with what they were witnessing. Victoria's voice became desperate. I loved your father. I would never hurt him. This is all made up. But the evidence was overwhelming. After your father died, I went through his things in the attic, I explained. That's where I found his diary. But I also found something else. Something you forgot to get rid of. I turned to another page in the scrapbook. There, taped to the paper, was a pharmacy receipt. The date was 2 weeks before Michael got sick. The item purchased was a small bottle of liquid medication that wasn't prescribed to anyone in the house. This is your signature on the purchase slip, I pointed out. You bought this medication with cash, gave a fake address, and tried to disguise your handwriting. But I had a handwriting expert compare it to your old Christmas cards. Victoria's face went white. She'd forgotten about that receipt, probably thought she'd thrown it away with all the other evidence. What is that medication? Hannah asked, staring at the receipt. It's something that causes symptoms that look like a natural illness, I explained. Nausea, weakness, confusion. In small doses, it makes someone sick. In larger doses, especially when combined with other medications, it can be fatal. The crowd murmured in horror. Victoria looked around desperately, searching for an ally, someone who might believe her denials. But everyone was staring at her with disgust and fear. I never bought that, she whispered. Someone forged my signature. This is all a setup. But her voice lacked conviction now. She knew she was caught. I didn't just rely on what I found in the attic, I continued. I hired a private investigator to look into your activities during the weeks before Michael died. Victoria's eyes went wide. You did what? Detective Williams has been working on this case for 6 weeks. He found security footage from the pharmacy where you bought the medication. He interviewed the pharmacist who remembered you because you acted so nervous. He also found the nurse you tried to bribe to falsify Michael's medical records. The crowd gasped again. Hannah dropped the scrapbook and stared at her mother in complete horror. I never bribed anyone. Victoria screamed. This is all lies. You're making this up because you blame me for your son's death. The nurse kept the money you gave her, I said calmly. She was suspicious about why you wanted her to change the cause of death on the preliminary report. She reported it to her supervisor, who reported it to the police. Victoria's legs seemed to give out. She sank into a nearby chair, her face pale and her hands shaking. The case built itself, I continued. Every lie you told, every bribe you attempted, every piece of evidence you thought you'd destroyed. Detective Williams found it all. Hannah picked up the scrapbook again, this time turning to the section labeled Investigation Results. Page after page of documented evidence, witness statements, and expert analysis. Her mother wasn't just a killer. She was a sloppy killer. The scrapbook is just the beginning, I told Hannah gently. Everything is documented on this USB drive too. Police reports, expert testimony, witness statements, and timeline analysis. I handed her the small drive. There are video files, audio recordings, and copies of all the evidence Detective Williams gathered. Your mother thought she was clever, but she left a trail everywhere she went. Victoria stood up suddenly, her chair falling backward. I'm not listening to this anymore. Hannah, we're leaving. Right now. But Hannah didn't move. She stared at the USB drive like it contained her father's voice. In a way, it did. There's also footage from the hospital security cameras, I continued. Video of you sneaking into Michael's room at night when the nurses thought you'd gone home. Video of you injecting something into his fore. Video of you checking his pulse and looking disappointed when he was still alive. The crowd had grown completely silent. Even the catering staff had stopped working to listen. Victoria's perfect party had become her worst nightmare. The footage is time-stamped, I explained. It matches perfectly with your father's diary entries about feeling worse after your mother's visits. Hannah looked up at Victoria with eyes full of betrayal. How could you do this to him? How could you do this to me? Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. Instead of denial or fake concern, her face showed only anger. You don't understand what it was like, she snapped. Being married to a man who made decent money but never wanted to spend it. Living in that tiny apartment, driving that old car, never having anything nice. The confession hung in the air like poison. Hannah stood up slowly, still clutching the scrapbook. Her tears had stopped, replaced by something harder. Something that looked disturbingly like her mother's coldness. What did you do to Daddy? She asked, her voice steady now. The question cut through the silence like a knife. Victoria looked around the yard at the faces staring back at her. Her friends, her neighbors, her family. All looking at her like she was a stranger. I didn't do anything, she whispered, but the fight had gone out of her voice. You poisoned him, Hannah said. It wasn't a question anymore. You gave him medicine that made him sick. Then you made him sicker. Then you killed him when he was too weak to stop you. The crowd erupted. Victoria's sister started crying. Her friends backed away in horror. Several people pulled out their phones to call the police. Victoria made one last desperate attempt. Hannah, honey, you have to understand. I loved your father, but the insurance money meant we could have a better life. I could give you everything you deserved. Private school, nice clothes, this beautiful house. I would rather live in a cardboard box with my dad than in a mansion built on his grave, Hannah replied. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her own daughter, choosing her dead father over her living mother, choosing truth over comfort, choosing justice over luxury. I had never been more proud of my granddaughter. The party broke up faster than ice in summer heat. Guests grabbed their purses and ran for their cars, whispering frantically to each other. Victoria chased after some of them, trying to explain, trying to convince them that everything they'd heard was lies. But no one would look her in the eye anymore. Please, she called to her sister. You know me. You know I could never hurt anyone. Her sister stopped at the gate and turned around. I thought I knew you, she said quietly. But the woman I knew wouldn't have killed her husband for money. The woman I knew wouldn't have traumatized her daughter like this. Victoria's neighbors hurried past without speaking. Her book club friends avoided her completely. Within 20 minutes, the backyard was empty except for Victoria, Hannah, and me. The expensive decorations looked ridiculous now. Gold balloons drifted in the breeze like guilty secrets. The chocolate fountain kept running, but no one wanted to taste it anymore. Hannah sat in her chair, still holding the scrapbook. Grandpa Frank, she said softly. What happens now? Now we wait for the police, I replied. And we make sure your father gets the justice he deserves. Victoria collapsed into a chair, all her fight finally gone. The mask had slipped completely, revealing the person she'd been hiding underneath all along. 2 days later, the story was everywhere. Local news, social media, even national television. Beloved wife accused of murder ran on every channel. The photos from Hannah's party, the shocking revelations, the evidence of calculated killing. Victoria had tried to control the narrative, posting on Facebook about family lies and cruel accusations. But the evidence was too strong. The story was too compelling. The truth was too obvious. Her social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Former friends shared their own suspicions about her behavior after Michael's death. Neighbors recalled strange incidents that made sense now. The insurance company announced they were investigating the claim. The pharmacy confirmed they were cooperating with police. The hospital began reviewing all of Victoria's visits to Michael's room. Victoria went into hiding, staying inside her expensive house with the curtains drawn. But reporters camped outside. Camera crews filmed every time she peeked through the blinds. Hannah stayed with me during those first few days. She couldn't bear to be in the same house as her mother. The same house that had been bought with her father's blood money. The money doesn't matter, she told me one evening as we watched the news coverage. None of it matters if Daddy isn't here to enjoy it with us. I hugged her tight, proud of her wisdom and heartbroken by her pain. On the third day, the police came for Victoria. Not with sirens and drama, but quietly, professionally. 2 detectives knocked on her door and asked her to come with them for questioning. She tried to refuse at first. Then she tried to lawyer up. Finally, she realized she had no choice. Hannah and I watched from my living room window as Victoria was led to the police car. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the weight of her crimes finally catching up with her. At the station, her story changed 3 times in 2 hours. First, she denied everything. Then she admitted to buying the medication but claimed it was for herself. Finally, when confronted with the security footage and witness statements, she broke down completely. The insurance money had been spent already. New house, new car, new wardrobe, expensive vacations. Hannah's private school tuition. The lavish birthday party that had been her downfall. Detective Williams called me that evening. She's confessed to everything, he said. The poisoning, the tampering, even the attempted bribe. She's trying to claim it was a mercy killing, that Michael was suffering and she was helping him end his pain. But that's not what the diary says, I replied. No, he agreed. The diary makes it clear he wanted to live. He was fighting to recover. She killed him for money, pure and simple. The coroner agreed to reopen Michael's case based on the new evidence. His body was exhumed for additional testing, and the results were conclusive. Traces of the medication Victoria had purchased were found in his tissue samples. The original autopsy had missed it because no one was looking for it. The symptoms matched Michael's illness so perfectly that everyone assumed it was natural. Even the doctors had been fooled. But now, with the diary entries providing a timeline and the pharmacy receipts providing proof of purchase, the cause of death was clear: intentional poisoning. A new death certificate was issued. Official cause: Homicide by toxic substance administration. The insurance company immediately froze all remaining assets and began proceedings to recover the money Victoria had already spent. The house would be sold. The car would be repossessed. Everything purchased with blood money would be taken away. Hannah didn't care about any of that. "I just want people to know Daddy didn't die because he gave up," she told the reporters gathered outside my house. "He died because someone he trusted betrayed him." The story made national headlines again. Father's diary exposes wife's murder plot. Grandfather's gift reveals deadly secret. Insurance fraud turns to murder. Justice was finally coming for my son. Victoria was arrested on charges of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice. Her bail was set at $2 million, which she couldn't afford since all her assets were frozen. Hannah watched the arrest on the news, tears running down her face. Not tears of sadness this time, but tears of relief. The woman who had killed her father would finally face consequences. "She's crying," Hannah observed, watching Victoria break down as the handcuffs were applied. "Some people only cry when they're caught," I replied. "Not when they do the crime." Victoria's mugshot appeared on every news channel. The woman who had thrown elaborate parties and flaunted her wealth now looked haggard and desperate. Her designer clothes had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit. Her perfectly styled hair hung limp and unwashed. The community that had once admired her success now saw her for what she really was, a cold-blooded killer who had murdered her husband for money. Hannah moved in with me permanently that week. She couldn't bear to live in the house anymore, knowing it had been purchased with her father's life. Every room reminded her of the lies she'd been living. "I'm glad she got arrested," Hannah told me as we made dinner together. "But I wish none of this had ever happened. I wish Daddy was still alive and we were still a real family." "I wish that too. But at least now, Michael could rest in peace." The trial began 6 months later. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and family. Victoria sat at the defendant's table looking nothing like the confident woman who had thrown that birthday party. I testified first, describing how I'd found Michael's diary and the evidence it contained. My voice stayed steady as I read passages aloud, sharing my son's fear and desperation with the jury. Hannah testified too, despite being only 14. She spoke about her father's illness, her mother's behavior, and the moment she opened that scrapbook at her birthday party. "My mom always told me my dad died because he was weak," Hannah said from the witness stand. "But now I know he died because he was strong enough to write down the truth." Victoria's defense attorney tried to paint her as a grieving widow who had made poor decisions under stress. But the evidence was overwhelming. The diary, the receipts, the security footage, the expert testimony. Victoria herself took the stand on the final day. She claimed she'd only wanted to end Michael's suffering, that she'd acted out of love and mercy. But Michael's diary entries proved that was a lie. He'd been fighting to get better, not begging to die. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. "Guilty on all charges." The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Victoria's screams followed immediately after, her composure finally breaking completely as the reality of life in prison sank in. Hannah sat beside me in the gallery, watching her mother's breakdown with dry eyes. She'd cried all her tears months ago. Now there was only justice. Murder in the first degree, guilty. Insurance fraud, guilty. Obstruction of justice, guilty. Each verdict hit like a hammer blow. Victoria turned to look at Hannah one last time, her face twisted with rage and desperation. But Hannah didn't look back. She stared straight ahead, her hand in mine. The judge sentenced Victoria to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The insurance fraud added another 10 years. The obstruction charge added 5 more. The defendant showed a level of premeditation and callousness that shocks the conscience, the judge said. She killed her husband slowly and deliberately, documenting his suffering while she planned her next move. She traumatized her daughter and destroyed her family for nothing more than money. Victoria was led away in chains, still screaming about her innocence. But everyone in that courtroom knew the truth. The evidence had been too clear, the diary too detailed, the betrayal too complete. Michael finally had his justice. Hannah moved in with me permanently after the trial. Not just as family, but for healing. She started seeing a counselor to help process everything that had happened. She changed schools to get away from the publicity and the whispers. Slowly, she began calling me Dad, instead of Grandpa. Not because she'd forgotten her real father, but because she needed a parent who would protect her instead of exploiting her. "You saved me," she told me one evening as we worked in the garden together. "If you hadn't found Daddy's diary, I would have grown up thinking she was a good person. I would have learned to be like her." The thought of Hannah becoming like Victoria made my blood run cold. My granddaughter was kind and honest and generous. Everything her mother wasn't. "Your father saved you," I corrected. "He wrote down the truth so someone would find it someday. He knew you'd need to know what really happened." We planted tomatoes that spring, the same kind Michael had loved as a boy. Hannah worked beside me, her hands dirty and her face peaceful. She was healing, slowly but surely. The house Victoria had bought with blood money was sold to pay back the insurance company. Hannah didn't want any of it. "I don't want anything that came from hurting Daddy," she said. Instead, we started over together, grandfather and granddaughter, building a life based on truth instead of lies. Hannah kept the scrapbook beside her bed, reading a letter from her father every night before sleep. She said it felt like he was still there, still protecting her, still guiding her through life. "Listen to this one," she said one evening, reading from one of Michael's letters. "Hannah, if you're reading this, it means something bad has happened to me. But I want you to know that you are the best thing I ever did in my life. You are smart and kind and brave, and I know you'll grow up to be an amazing woman." She wiped her eyes and continued, "Don't let anyone tell you that love is about money or things. Real love is about sacrifice and truth and protecting the people who matter most. Your grandpa Frank taught me that, and I'm teaching it to you." The letters were like messages from beyond the grave, a father's final gift to his daughter. They contained his hopes for her future, his pride in her accomplishments, and his love that death couldn't diminish. "There are 52 letters," Hannah told me. "One for every week until my 18th birthday. Daddy planned everything, even this." She was right. Michael had somehow known that his life might be cut short, and he'd prepared accordingly. The diary wasn't just evidence of Victoria's crimes. It was a love letter to his daughter, ensuring she'd know the truth about who her parents really were. "I'm proud of him," Hannah said, "and I'm proud of you for finding it." I sit on my porch now, holding the last page of the scrapbook. Hannah is inside, doing homework and talking to her counselor on the phone. She's healing beautifully, becoming the strong young woman her father always knew she could be. The final page contains a letter addressed to me. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've found my diary. Thank you for protecting Hannah from the truth until she was ready to hear it. Thank you for giving her a safe place to land when her world fell apart. Thank you for being the father I always aspired to be." The letter continues. "I knew Victoria was dangerous, but I was too weak to stop her. I could only hope that someday, someone would find this evidence and make sure Hannah knew what really happened. I knew that someone would be you." My gift to Hannah that day wasn't cheap. It was priceless. It contained the truth about her father's love, her mother's betrayal, and the justice that followed. Victoria thought she could build a kingdom on lies and blood money. But truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried in attics and hidden in scrapbooks. Hannah calls me Dad now, and I'm honored by the title. I couldn't save my son, but I could save his daughter. I couldn't prevent the murder, but I could ensure justice. The scrapbook sits on Hannah's nightstand, a testament to love that survives death and truth that conquers deception. My gift shattered a liar's kingdom and rebuilt a family on solid ground. Sometimes the most important gifts really don't cost money at all. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.